From Music City, USA, it's David Hooper and Music Business Radio.
From the Tuned In Broadcasting Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host. With me today, the owner of String Theory Media, Craig Havighurst, also the author of the book Air Castle of the South, WSM and the Making of Music City. He's a senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe, a syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. Craig, welcome to Music Business Radio.
Hello, David.
This is the second time you've been here, but it's been several years.
It's been 4 or 5 years.
I think at least. So
glad to be back.
Good to have you back. And for people that don't remember the last time you were on, let's take it back to the beginning of your music business career. Give them a refresher. Tell them why you're here.
Well, I was a journalist first and covered a lot of wonky policy stuff over in the healthcare world. And that brought me to Nashville indirectly. And here I had time on my hands and a passion for music and an interest in trying to take a stab at music journalism, and started writing pieces freelance, which went great, and found a niche and found a kind of a voice. Wound up getting a job at the Tennessean, where I was for almost 4 years with Peter Cooper, who's still there and doing a great job. Left there in 2004 to freelance and to focus on the book. Really was the first order of business, was to get that book out of my system because it was gnawing at me.
That's the old saying that everybody dies with a book inside them. Maybe except for journalists, right? You didn't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the changing face of music journalism because I think it's something that musicians can relate to, and really anybody in the music business. Everything is changing, and journalism is one of those things. Like musicians, for example, we used to have CDs, records, what we call phono records. You guys used to have print, not so much anymore.
Well, it's the great democratization of creativity, which is great and which sucks if you're a professional creator. And musicians all know this, that the supply side of music has exploded, and that's just made their product harder to find, scarcer in people's mind share, and you just have a lot more competition. And in music journalism, of course, the internet gave everybody a shot at being a music critic, a blogger, and there's some great blogs, and I think there's a pretty good meritocracy out there. I think that the blogs with personality and that are not, the bloggers are knowledgeable, they tend to rise to the surface. I wouldn't say that there's a vast amounts of, really bad writing that has huge market share and credibility. I think that by and large, you look out there, there's never been a better time. Problem is that there's so much of it that it's hard for any given writer to demand a living wage for the work that they do. So I tried to survive by finding other media to skill up on, radio reporting, which I did for a number of years for WPLN and NPR, doing features for them, and some filmmaking. That's what String Theory Media is and was really, is a little boutique kind of EPK company. And, we did pieces of documentaries for some network productions and National Public Television. And so diversifying, I think, is the watchword for journalists as well as for musicians who are needing to find other streams of income through film and TV or teaching or whatever.
I think the book is a really great example. And the book, again, it's called Air Castle of the South, WSM and the Making of Music City. It was originally released in paperback, or not paperback, but print. Hardback.
Yeah.
Big, thick book. You're going to want to read it again and again. So hardback, and it took you guys a while to release it digitally.
It did. That has a little bit to do with the business model of a academic press, which is part of a University of Illinois press, and they and Amazon there was some little conflict about what Amazon needed in its terms of service that the publisher couldn't do, but they finally worked it out. So it's out in Kindle and ebook now, and then the paperback's coming in April. And the paperback takes a while at an academic press just because most of them never come out in paperback at all.
Yeah.
They did a second print run for the hardback, so that put a big stash of them in the warehouse that they had to go through. So here we are, almost 5 years later, but I'm thrilled about it.
Well, we take speed for granted these days.
Yeah.
You talk about paperback or hardback, you've actually got to print it. You got to put it on a truck, get it to people. Kindle, it's just there, and that's how we are with digital music. That's how it is with blogging and things. You didn't have that luxury when you were with the print or the paper.
And I can't believe, I'm really surprised at how many ebooks I have read. It's now really a huge part of my life, and I read giant books on my iPhone. I read most of the Lord of the Rings on my iPhone, and I would have never dreamed that I would have done that.
You're listening to Music Business Radio. With me today, Craig Havighurst. He's the owner of String Theory Media. He's a senior producer and show journalist for the show Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe. It's a syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. Let's talk about the book, and then I want to dive into building a fan base. how you built the show and some of the other things that you've done. You've got a one-man show, speaking of show, called String Theory.
Yeah, that's a recent addition and something that I felt motivated to do because I wanted to talk in a public forum about music that's not song-based. In Nashville, music and songs are synonymous terms. When people ask, say, what's your favorite kind of music? People come back with a form of a genre of song-based popular music. 3 to 5 minute songs and a singer singing it. And I grew up as a fan of, as a player of classical music and then of jazz. And jazz is to this day my kind of evangelical cause because I believe that there's unbelievable talent of young Americans trying to pursue what is America's greatest cultural art form ever, I believe. And they are struggling. I mean, really struggling because the market share for jazz in the larger scheme of what sells as downloads or CDs is about 1%, and most of that is catalog from back in history. Right. But if you look at your Jason Morans and your Christian McBrides and your young, staggeringly talented players, they really struggle in the U.S. for a live audience, to sell records. They have to go to Europe to be taken seriously. So I feel like there's a huge deficit in the public conversation about instrumental music, about sound and how organized sound and patterned sound made by composers, made by improvising musicians. People have a hard time, I think, learning how to relate to it when they've been raised on song-based music and MTV and the singer as the most important thing, rather than the ensemble and the texture and the timbre and the time and the composer's gifts. And I was lucky to have a classical upbringing and a lot of jazz training that I never became a professional, but I became a very dedicated amateur musician who plays most every day and has developed as a guitar player, I hope. And I don't think that the dominant music culture of the last 30 years in the post-MTV era was conducive to getting people involved in a sonic relationship to music. It's more like the words and the singer. And so that's what that show's about.
Have you read the new David Byrne book? It's called How Music Works. He talks a lot about that in that book.
He certainly talks about amateurism and the value of pursuing a life in music that is active and engaged in some kind of music making, and dispelling the idea that if you're not going to be a professional, if you know you're never going to be great, if you're not, people quit because they think I don't have talent. I hear that so often. I just don't believe that. I think it's just a myth that people make about themselves. But I think there's very little support in the culture for continuing to encourage participation the way there is, say, in sports. Sports journalism is structured so differently than music journalism. It has a very different underlying message. It has a lot more trust in the audience's knowledge of the rules of the game, and it encourages, just through the very advertising and the way they talk about it, encourages people to go out there and get involved and play tennis, run, whatever. And music lacks that.
I'd love for you to dive deeper into that. I think about when you said sports journalism and how it's different. One of the things I think about is you've got guys covering high school sports.
That's right.
You go to a small town in Mississippi, let's say.
Totally onto something.
They're on the radio.
Yep.
And you don't necessarily have that with your amateur band or even people getting together and playing sports, which
That's
is
right.
what people
Imagine
do.
the validation of seeing your name in a box score when you're 12 and 13 years old playing Little League or junior football or the high school team. You get this kind of feedback loop of you may never be a Hall of Fame player, but it's worthy just doing what you're doing. That's one aspect. The other is they use terminology about sports that assumes that the audience is either already knowledgeable about those terms or is not going to turn off the television because the term felt unfamiliar to them. But through context and repetition and explaining, people build up an idea of the inner game of football, baseball, basketball. So when something happens and when their team finally does triumph, they know inside kind of like what chain of events led that to happen. And they can feel like they share in the insight. Whereas with music, people I think are supposed to feel like they're just supposed to feel good when they hear it and like it in the here and the now, in the moment. And that's all there is, rather than kind of working through the understanding of something that at first sounds dissonant or weird to you, but trusting and then having somebody hold your hand a little bit and take you down into it. Growing up in my childhood, Leonard Bernstein was on primetime TV explaining how to listen to a symphony or what a sonata was or why Beethoven's music and composing was really different than Mozart. Whereas somebody who might just say, well, it's both classical, they both have violins, and they kind of sound the same.
Yeah.
But there's so much more nuance in sports journalism, and I find it a great way to talk about what's missing in music.
Well, that's a very unique perspective. I've never thought about it, but when say I'm at the gym, ESPN is on. There's a bunch of talking heads. They're talking about players. There's analysis. There's the clip shows. You just really just don't have that with music. And thinking about it, it's like, I don't think they dumb it down. I'm not a sports fan, but it doesn't seem like they're dumbing it down like they do with music. Most music listeners, they don't know about key signatures. They don't know about time signatures. They don't know about very basic things that I think the equivalent of sports fans do.
I've often wondered that I'd like to actually do some research in music literacy among the general public and what kind of background people who do have some compare to those who don't. I just don't know. I would hate to say that Americans don't know what syncopation is when I don't have any data.
Yeah.
But I get the feeling that the only kind of cultural group I see in the country who has this kind of ongoing relationship to that visceral sense of, say, rhythm are people who are out there in the jam band audience who want to hear something different every night from the same band, who go to see Galactic with a turntablist, who go see Medeski, Martin, and Wood, go on these long, jaggy trips where nobody's sure where they're going and working with the audience to have a creative experience in the moment. That's a very active world, but I think that's a niche genre and not the dominant.
I would agree, because I think you can ask any wedding DJ or ask any wedding band. People don't, for the most part, want to hear new music. They want to hear something that they're familiar with. From working in radio, me as well, that you don't play new music right away. You have to let it get a little heat on it before you actually play it.
Yeah, and very different from the first wave, the first generation of DJ-based radio, where DJs were excited as hell to introduce a new record to the audience.
And they were the tastemakers.
They would talk it up. They were tastemakers, and the audience was expecting them to turn them on to something. That clearly evolved into a very different model.
Well, when we come back, I want to dive a little bit more deep into your book, Air Castle of the South, WSM, and the Making of Music City. Not really about the book, though, but about the music industry culture that we have here in Nashville and about how that's evolved and where we are now, including with your new show, Music City Roots. Craig Havighurst is my guest today. This is Music Business Radio. More from Craig when we come back.
Now I'm smoking into Texas with a hammer down and a rockin' little combo from the guitar town.
This is Emmylou Harris, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
Americana Music Association and AEG Live, the Messina Group, present Americana's Cross County Lines, hosted by Allison Krauss and Jerry Douglas.
Give you a song in a one-night stand, and you'll be looking at a happy man, 'cause you're the lucky one.
Americana's Cross County Lines, Saturday, June 1st at the Factory in Franklin, Tennessee. Join Allison Krauss and Jerry Douglas in a unique one-night celebration of American roots music.
Well, you're blessed, I guess, by never knowing which road you're choosing.
Featured guests include Sean Colvin, Amos Lee, Angel Snow, Teddy Thompson, and Sarah Jaros. Proceeds benefit the Americana Music Association's not-for-profit mission to advocate for the authentic voice of American roots music. Saturday, June 1st, The Factory in Franklin, Americana's Cross County Lines.
This is Neela from the Lumineers. You're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music biz.
From Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio. I'm David Hooper, your host. With me today, Craig Havighurst. He's the author of the book, Air Castle of the South, WSM and the Making of Music City. He's also the senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe, syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. Now, Craig, about the book, Air Castle of the South, WSM, big radio station. We've got 4 letters now. It used to have 3. That's how old it was.
Yeah, it started in 1925, and I got to Nashville in 1996 and began poking around about the history of the city, and I could not believe there hadn't been a book written about this radio station.
Talk about how influential WSM was and really still is on music.
Well, its first wave of influence was very different than the nature of its influence now. It gave rise to a music business in an industry in Nashville where there was none before. There simply was no reason to think that Nashville was going to become Music City, USA in 1925 or 1930. Nashville got a great radio station thanks to the investment of an insurance company, National Life and Accident. The Grand Ole Opry got on there by kind of an interesting confluence of events, but also because Middle Tennessee had the talent pool. But really, it was in the 40s and 50s when people who had been trained in live radio and recording and engineering and artist management and tour booking realized that this business was starting to boom nationwide and said, well, we want a piece of that. And one after the other, these people left WSM to start the first recording studio in Nashville, the first independent record company, the first publishing companies, the first artist management companies, the first tour booking agencies. Everybody in that first wave of Music Row or virtual Music Row had worked at WSM. Owen Bradley, the signature producer of the 1960s, was the music director at WSM for 14 years. He was on staff for 14 years. And it was the gathering place for the musical community from country to pop to jazz to gospel to classical. That the 20s and 30s was a huge breadth of music they played. So it was the confluence point, and it generated something really magic and unprecedented.
And the reach was quite large. It wasn't just around the Middle Tennessee area.
AM radio bounced off the ionosphere at night and would reach as far as California on good nights. So they reached 2/3 of the country, 38 states, with a 50,000 watt signal. And
3 countries.
Sometimes, yes, people could hear them in Mexico.
That was huge for Nashville. That was kind of like, it's funny that everybody talks about the television show now called Nashville, but this was kind of like Nashville in our outreach back in 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, if it hadn't happened that way, Nashville could look like Charlotte today or any number of southern cities, but not be Music City. It's kind of remarkable.
Craig, one of the things that I've noticed about the music business, and I think it's starting to happen again, is that it was really founded by business people and not necessarily creative people. And it sounds like that's what was going on at WSM. When they were going to leave, they're going to start studios. They said, well, how do we get played on the radio? Well, we have to have something recorded. So let's do a studio. Let's press some records. They saw an opportunity as a business as opposed to maybe just a creative endeavor.
Yeah, the first thing that happened was the Opry stars who had convened here and were playing every Saturday night at the Ryman Auditorium were having to go to Chicago or New York to make their records. And the engineers at WSM said, that's dumb. We've got studios right here. So they started to cut records in the studio, and when that got successful enough, they built a studio out of a hotel ballroom a block away and created Castle Recording. That, in turn, gave some other musicians opportunity to record records that caught Nashville by surprise, notably Francis Craig's record Near You. In 1947 becomes the biggest pop record in the country. And nobody thought that a pop record was coming out of Nashville. So little things like that happened. Plus, the Acuff Rose Publishing was formed in the early 40s. Now, those were creative guys. Fred Rose was a producer and a piano player, songwriter, worked with Hank Williams, Roy Acuff, the great fiddle player, king of the Grand Ole Opry. But they started signing writers. And when songs like Tennessee Waltz became these giant pop hits for Patti Page, they started to make real money. And everybody else is like, well, we can do that too.
You're listening to Music Business Radio. With me today, Craig Havighurst of String Theory Media. We're talking about his book, Air Castle of the South, WSM, The Making of Music City, and what makes Nashville great, what it was, and where it's going. I still think there's that potential in Nashville today. I think we're kind of starting to see that. It's a changing landscape, and it seems to me that Nashville is kind of a slow city. Maybe when you came here, and now it's starting to speed up a little bit.
I got here in 96, and there was a big cover story in the New York Times Magazine the week I moved here by Peter Applebaum about the new Nashville. And it was about BR 549 on Lower Broadway and Dead Reckoning Records and this whole sort of community scene. And I thought, this is exciting. And indeed, I found that, but it was always localized, and it was always some kind of boom was always on the horizon. And it was coming. And finally, it seems like in the last 3 years, the explosions happened. The wave finally crested. And a whole confluence of things. I mean, the Black Keys sort of setting up shop here, Jack White setting up shop here, gave cred to the non-country side of things. And then the business atomized into an independent-minded, independent-based business again.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of like what you said about journalism. We kind of had to. The major label system was kind of starting to falter, and the independence, that was our way to survive.
And I think that that's what creative people really wanted. When the only option was a major label deal, people dutifully sought the major label deal. When new tools, new tactics, and a new mindset finally became possible, and people also began to realize that a major label deal was not the terms weren't so great, that it didn't guarantee success. And they saw artists who were keeping 80% of every CD sold or every download sold versus, 10 or 12. A whole generation began to school itself up as entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial creatives. And that's a survival tactic that I see written about in jazz and classical. Anybody that's not looking for a pop record success has got to be kind of a combination entrepreneur, freelance artist, troubadour. A lot of people are talking about this new Amanda Palmer TED Talk where she talks about the art of asking and the fairness of being a creative person and asking for some contribution back to what you do as you travel and sleep on couches and live a life that has a lot of sacrifices in it. That, yeah, it's fair to take a bed for a night, to take $10 from a fan who hands it to you, to be that troubadour with the bucket on the street, as long as you give generously to your audience.
Something else I was thinking about when you mentioned Nashville and country, I think it's the way we marketed things, and I think somebody was afraid to be like that first guy. We knew that this non-country stuff was happening locally, but to go outside and say you're from Nashville because of our reputation, because of Opryland and TNN, it took, I think, real guts for somebody to have success saying, hey, I'm not country, but I'm from Nashville. But once they did it, everybody else piled on.
Yeah, and I think just there's certain cultural associations that are so hard to kill. You don't know why some of them work that way, but you say Nashville, it just for years, the cultural momentum just stuck an image. But if I say, traveling by airship, you think of the Hindenburg. Like ridiculous. It happened in 1939, and it's still like it's hard to change in a southern conservative town sometimes.
Well, it's one of those things that it works until it doesn't work, and I guess we got to the point where it worked well enough, and we still wanted to continue to do it. Like when you see Nashville on the Super Bowl, for example, we got to have a halftime of square dancers, but at the same time, we kind of cringe a little bit because we know there's more. So I mentioned TNN, which is the Nashville Network, a nationwide network dedicated to Nashville and all things Nashville. Also Opryland, which our version of Six Flags maybe. That's what WSM became. Yeah. And I love your thoughts on that. What it became in the 80s was sort of a different business, but kind of the same.
Yeah, I kind of initially thought that the book, The Story of WSM, would sort of come to a natural conclusion in the 60s. But then when I realized that same company had been such a force in the 1980s by starting TNN, one of the very first national cable networks there was. It was low on the dial. It was next to ESPN in most markets. And they invested in it ambitiously. About the same time, a little after, they built Opryland Theme Park, which drew as many as 2 million visitors to Nashville a year, hired tons of live musicians in pit orchestras, singers, dancers, arrangers, percussionists, the kinds of people you wouldn't expect who are not getting, work regularly in studios on Music Row, were working in long summers in Nashville. Some of those went off to the Nashville Symphony. Some of them went off to do film score work, but they gave young people jobs. And they didn't track any music in that theme park. For the entire run of that theme park, every bit of music there was performed by a live musician. And it was a point of pride for them that carried right back to WSM in the 20s and 30s, when live was the only option. Then TNN had really huge audience. It eventually became the audience that advertisers don't think was the right audience because it was an older audience. And shows like the Statler Brothers had the #1 rated show in all of cable television, had the show canceled because the advertisers thought that their demo was too elderly. So you're getting into issues of what happened to national media in the 80s and 90s. Who were the buyers that kept those shows sustained? Well, it's all about the cult of youth. And that's another force that just distorts people who are just trying to be in the entertainment business. They found their market, and then they're undermined by that kind of thing.
Was interesting because it's happening in the music itself also. If you look at country records, those older artists, what happened to those guys? A lot of them got dropped because the people thought there was not an interest for them, and now they're starting to come back around again.
Yeah, we could do 10 shows on country radio as a format, and what happened when the Telecom Act passed, when consultants began to run programming, and that's just a kind of an American tragedy in some ways. Yeah, you went through an era where Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton and Merle Haggard and those people were honored around town. They were given banquets, but they were dropped from record deals because they couldn't match the sales totals of the new generation of Garths and Shanias. The record companies in Nashville let radio nationwide, radio chains, consolidated radio programs, just take so much of the lead on what was working and who their audience was going to be. In 2001, I covered CRS, and I watched a consultant get up and tell everybody that country radio had lost 60% of its P1 core listeners over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years. More than half of the audience that had made up the bulk of country listeners in the 1970s and 80s and early 90s had walked away from the format. They didn't like the music anymore. And the people in the room didn't care because they had drawn in a bigger audience of younger people who wanted to hear something that was basically pop music on a country station.
So CRS, that is
it's a country radio convention, business convention.
I mean, anybody in country radio was there and they didn't care, which says a lot about how radio changed.
Not about the fans that wanted to hear Merle Haggard and Alabama and Dolly Parton and that generation. It was, they thought, good riddance. They're not going to sell to our advertisers.
It had become a business, and when we come back,
well, it always was.
But when we come back, you're running a business called Music City Roots, and you guys are doing things a little bit of a different way. You got some old guys there on staff, old guys playing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that when we come back. This is Music Business Radio. Craig Havighurst is my guest today. He's the senior producer, show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe, a syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. More from Craig when we come back on Music Business Radio.
You're listening to Music Business Radio on the web at musicbusinessradio.com.
Lightning 100 and Grolsch invite you to East Nashville Underground Spring 2013, Friday and Saturday, May 10th and 11th. It's part urban legend, part basement festival, highlighting 18 of the best local bands and DJs in town, like The Weeks, the Kingston Springs, Aaron McCarley,
I like the shock that I get when you go.
the Kicks, Chancellor Warhol,
I said the king's in the building.
Repeat,
I can't believe it's true.
and more. Enjoy an ice-cold Grolsch, a local food brunch, and the underground art scene. Wristbands are available now. Visit East Nashville Underground on Facebook for more details. Support the local music festival that continues to put East Nashville on the map. East Nashville Underground at the East Room, 2412 Gallatin Road. Sponsored by Lightning 100 and Grolsch. Imported by Grolsch Importers, Washington, D.C. With great beer comes great responsibility.
Hello, people of the loving public. This is Webb Wilder, the last of the full-grown men, urging you to work hard, rock hard, eat hard, sleep hard, grow big, wear glasses if you need them, because that's the Webb Wilder credo. And I want you to listen to Music Business Radio.
From the TuneIn Broadcasting Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. With me today, Craig Havighurst. He's the senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe, a syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. How did it start, Craig?
Music City Roots was dreamed up by two guys named Todd Mayo and John Walker, and their background was in radio advertising. So they knew the radio business, but from the point of view of guys who bought and sold time, and they knew how to close sponsorship deals. And they were also very passionate musically, neither one with a strong background in roots Americana, but it was where they were gravitating. And they were working with WSM at the time directly. The show aired on WSM as its local host for a year. In the end, not a perfect fit, but they were leaning more Americana at the time and certainly had a tradition of live. So the idea of a live roots Americana show that featured a lot of different flavors of country and bluegrass was appealing to everybody involved. And certainly was appealing to me. That's the genres that I write about and follow. And they came to me because they had read the Aircast of the South story of WSM and thought that from the point of view of a story, that the show would have legs if it had a narrative behind it, if it had a kind of role in the larger arc of Nashville and where Nashville was going, what it had been and where it's heading. And they invited me to kind of be part of the creative team from the beginning, which was great. So they're the producers of the show. I write the artist intros, contribute to some to the booking, write the blog, which sort of tells our story as we go, and I do the interviews on stage with the artists, which we felt were critical to helping the audience get a little bit of sense of feeling for who the artists were and where they were coming from.
It gets you connected, and what it sounds like you guys are doing, the whole thing is live. You don't play recorded music in between set changes. You get on there and interview, so it's a lot like WSM in the early days. That's
right. That's what we wanted to be, and so you roll on whatever happens. We trim some of those things out for a syndicated show, but yeah, when we're live, and it's absolutely a blast to do it that way.
I'd love to know your thoughts on how to take your big idea and build it from the ground up? Because at this point, you guys are doing really well. I was out there last week, 500-600 people in the crowd, and then it was going nationwide on the radio. But I know that didn't just happen. So how did you guys build it? How did you guys get the momentum that you've got now?
A lot of sweat equity, and then Todd and John's ability to secure really significant sponsorships from some fantastic companies. Griffin Technology here in Nashville, global reach, making technology products, and Old Smoky Moonshine out of Gatlinburg with a Nashville footprint. French's Shoes and Boots, and I go on. But they were able to talk to these potential sponsors by saying, we want to weave you into our ethic. You're not just buying time on the show. We're going to read these commercials during the show live. Old school, an MC, Keith Bilbrey at the podium, telling you with that warm, inviting, trusted voice, the way Eddie Stubbs does sometimes on WSM, the way they did it routinely on live radio in the 40s. That was a huge part of the pitch. An advertising message coming from a culturally connected player and partner is going to mean a lot more than raw numbers on how many ears are you reaching right now. And the idea that if it's a community can grow. And we feel like we're growing both on our own, but also into a larger cultural movement where roots in Americana music is frankly blowing up, finally. I think largely because of the social web and the maturing of the internet, the maturing of YouTube, the maturing of Facebook, and finally letting Americans find the music they most personally have a kinship for and explore at will and explore very freely. And lo and behold, what comes out is people really did want to hear organic music you can hear through. You want to, textures of instruments they recognize, vocals that they can discern the words, songs that come from a meaningful place, and where there's not a lot of polish and a lot of auto-tune. And it is happening here, overseas. It's exciting. I mean, to see the Lumineers blow up so fast. Mumford & Sons is on the cover of Rolling Stone right now. And we think that there is an actual movement happening, and we really want to be a trusted player in that.
What about the booking process? I mean, having done live events for several years myself, I know that there's a fine line if you want to be a tastemaker and get the new guys coming in, but you also have to have that established act that's going to bring people in. So I'd love to know your thoughts on how you guys book and anything more about that.
Well, we have 4 or 5 slots a night. So the ideal is to mix exactly what you're describing. Somebody familiar that will draw numbers and that lets us say, we've presented Rodney Crowell and Daryl Scott and Tim O'Brien and Jerry Douglas and some of the giants of roots music. But the booking has really great ears for what's bubbling. And I just jotted down some of the artists that have played the show in the last 6 months who seem like they were not taken off, really. They took off after they played, and I give the guys really credit. Llewellyn and the Sun played the show just after a few gigs in Nashville, went down to South by Southwest and had a big blow-up with NPR. And Alana Royale played just the same week she'd won the Road to Bonnaroo. The Danburys are an East Nashville bluegrass band. I think are going to do really well. East Nashville's just producing unbelievable pools of talent. Alan Thompson and Dugas and Peter Cooper and Eric Brace. And we, I think, have a finger on the pulse, I hope,
You're listening to Music Business Radio. My name is David Hooper. I'm your host, and with me today, senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe, Craig Havighurst, talking about the show, how he built it. I'd like to know how you built your team, too. You mentioned Keith Bilbrey, and working in radio. That guy's amazing. I mean, he has a cool voice. He sells those ads. He's just an incredible, I guess, is he the host? Is that what you would say?
He's called the MC or the announcer. The musical host is Jim Lauderdale, and Jim, the host, sort of being the designation for the guy that actually brings the bands on and off the stage.
Okay.
Does the reading of the intro and says, now it's time for blah.
How did you get those guys? Because those guys were fairly established in the industry, and you got them on your show.
Keith is the second announcer we've had. It began with Eddie Stubbs when the show was on WSM. About the same time, WSM let go Keith Bilbrey after a 20-plus or nearly 30-year career there. Our parting ways with WSM threw that up in the air. Keith Bilbrey had been part of the show. He'd been a sub-host. It was absolutely natural. There's nobody better in the country to go for that classic radio announcer role. Jim was part of the show from the very beginning. He seemed as kind of ambassador of Americana, the host of the Americana Honors and Awards at the Ryman every year. He had taken on a role of a kind of evangelist and champion of the music, and a trusted name, and a guy who can do a song at the beginning of every show and it's going to be great, and it will have been probably recorded by somebody famous, and he's got a catalog that's endless. And he's just got a great personality. I mean, he's not afraid to just try stuff on the spur of the moment. And that 3-host core was, I think, my best idea about the format of the show. They said, what were the shows like in the 40s? Well, they had multiple voices. They had multiple hosts, each with a different role.
You know, I know from being here on Music Business Radio, there are highs and lows, and certainly syndication is one of those. We're on stations, then we're not on stations. That's just part of working in radio. And I'd love to know just about the tenacity of you and the Music City Roots team, because you make it seem easy when I listen to it, but I know there's a lot more behind the scenes. So how do you have that vision and keep everybody motivated and keep at it?
That is a great question, and those challenges creep up on you because you started with this head of steam and this just blind faith and optimism and tons of adrenaline, and after a while you realize, okay, we've regularized this, and we begin to see what problems crop up and what the long-term business model really can be, what is viable. And none of us are geniuses at management. We're all people who have been creative or been in sales, and we just kind of use common sense and compassion, esprit de corps. And every Wednesday night, I can say without hesitation, is a charge for everybody. The show is a blast because it is vivid. You know you're live. The talent has been unbelievable. I mean, I just cannot, on one hand, can't count the number of artists that I would not invite back that we've had in 3 years. That gives you a huge head of steam for the rest of the week. But we're producing the 2-hour syndicated show. We have a syndication director on a freelance basis, Leslie Ruffet, who's an Americana promoter. She's pushed it to the stations in Roots Americana, college radio. And sometimes we'll just call them up out of the blue and start relationships and court stations that we know are tastemakers in their region. And if anybody's out there listening, we are looking for partners.
Well, and you're also spreading out. It's not just Music City Roots anymore. I know you just did something in Chattanooga. Memphis is on the line, right?
We hope so about Memphis. Todd began this whole adventure by creating Bluegrass Underground, the show that happens monthly at Cumberland Caverns outside of McMinnville, Tennessee, a concert series in a cave, which he has successfully gotten onto public television nationwide, just filmed its 3rd season with some very big artists. That's kind of the big marquee. Then Music City Roots is the more scrappy, week-to-week, regular entertainment experience and music discovery experience. But the long-term vision, or not even that long, hopefully, is something that would tentatively be called a Tennessee Music Trail, with venues that tie the Roots vision and Roots philosophy of programming and artists that are become family to play venues from east to west Tennessee. Todd is from Memphis, so he's got a real interest in that incredible Roots music city. Mm-hmm. And we just launched Scenic City Roots in Chattanooga, and that's going to be monthly at a place called Track 29. And the first one was gangbusters. It was great. We're back in a few weeks.
So more information, musiccityroots.com. Is that the best place to go?
musiccityroots.com is the home, yes.
Well, speaking of tastemakers, Craig, we have a part of the show we call Dave's Demo Derby. Bands from around the world send in packages. There's a big bucket on the floor in between us that has some of those in there.
Yes.
When we come back, reach into the package, pick out a CD, pop it in the player, listen to it. We're going to see if you are a tastemaker. Something we're listening to today is going to be a big hit or maybe not. We don't know. That's next when we come back on Music Business Radio. My guest today, Craig Havighurst.
You're listening to Music Business Radio.
Come catch the feel-good indie party pop of Coin, live May 2nd at 12th and Porter. Come and celebrate with Coin, the release of their new EP 1992. It's all I want. Coin, with the Lonely Biscuits.
Let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go.
And Keeps. Thursday, May 2nd at 12th and Porter. Doors open at 7, show starts at 8. Tickets only $5 at 12thandporterlive.com.
Go on, circle honey pie. Tonight I'm gonna testify. Make day celebrate and you don't have to try.
Hi, this is Jim Lauderdale, and I learned everything I know about the music business on Music Business Radio.
This is Music Business Radio from the TuneIn Broadcasting Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm David Hooper, and now it's time for that part of the show we call Dave's Demo Derby. My guest today is Craig Havighurst. He's the senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe. Earlier, we were talking about tastemakers. We're going to see if Craig is a tastemaker. We've got a big demo box right in between us. Demos from around the world, but looking at them, Craig, not so much today. They look like California, one from Tennessee here. Usually we go international, and it's something that I wanted to ask you about. I know you guys just did something in Australia.
Music City Roots got to go to Australia. It was a blast. We were invited by the Tamworth Country Music Festival, the biggest country festival in Australia. Tamworth is going to become a sister city of Nashville in the middle of this year. Officially, that's been ongoing. So there was more than a few reasons to do something cultural, and they brought us over, and we did the show live on the air there, and we taped it and ran it on our live stream, and it was amazing. We had 2 Australian artists do full-length sets, 2 American artists do full-length sets, and then we interspersed that with locals who'd been busking on the streets that our producers met in the first couple of days there. And that went over really well because it just felt like it was inclusive and really reflective of that city. And the beauty of the Music City Roots identity, the brand, is that if and when we take it to other countries, other towns, which we very much want to do, we want to be reflective of the fact that every city is a music city and get the people to think in that town about what it is that they have to be proud of.
Kelly Rickey, she's from Van Nuys, California. Something's going on Music Business Radio Demo Derby.
Something's going on here. I can't find light. Something's going on here. Feeling just ain't right. I'm going down to the river. I'm gonna wash away all my fears. Something's going on here, making me afraid. Something's going on here, taking me away. I'm going down to the river. I'm gonna wash away all my tears. And I wanna know you, and I wanna feel inside, and I wanna show you, got nothing left to hide.
Kelly Rickey on Music Business Radio Demo Derby. KellyRichey.com is the website. Something's going on, Craig.
She plays her own guitar, and this is a woman who from the CD is in her 40s, maybe 50s, so somebody middle-aged just rocking, and I give her a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
And
I like the
playing
guitar.
her own riff thing right there. I mean, it's hard to do something with just riff-based blues rock, hard to do something terribly original and fresh, but, you know...
sometimes you don't need to be terribly original
of what
fresh.
she's doing that worked all right.
Well, it looks like she's got a nice package there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover, and the record was apparently recorded in Lexington, Kentucky, even though she may be from California, but the little South got on this record, it sounds like. So I could hear that.
Yeah, it kind of gave me, it reminded me of some of that old like 70s rock. Definitely like the riff, and even lyrically, vocally, she was that same way. I'd love to see her live and see if she could bring it out. That would be my suggestion for it. I kind of felt like she was maybe holding back from us. All right, next up, Dan Garnett. He's got a song called Empty Handed. He is from Boston. Dan Garnett on Music Business Radio Demo Derby.
All I know is that I am an empty-handed kind of man. In the mud I spend all my time as to wash away my pride. I want to go far from my fears. This place I call my home, it's not here nor there. And I don't know if it still remains, or if I am just numb to the pain. I want to go and find my place. I want to fly away. I want to go and find my place. I want to fly away.
Dan Garnett on Music Business Radio Demo Derby. He's out of Boston. The song's called Empty Handed. How about it, Craig?
Nice melody, nice original voice. I mean, he sounds like himself, and that's nice. Interested this one and the first one we listened to, the lyrics don't really have much structure. There are no rhymes, and I don't think the songs don't have to, but they kind of feel like almost prose sung with a melody over the top, but not really a melody that you feel like, okay, he repeated the theme there. And so pretty free form, and I guess maybe in Nashville we take a lot of the craft for granted because we hear so much of it. And that was a pretty individual approach to a song, but a pleasing listen.
Yeah, I like that part about it, actually. I loved his voice. Thought the guitar was cool. It kind of had that raw element, and I'm not sure how much he had worked on it. He probably worked on it more than it seemed, because to me, he pulled it off. So Dan Garnett, Empty Handed was the song. He's out of Boston. If you like him, Facebook.com/Dan Garnett Music is his website. And next up, I like the cover on this one, Craig. Have you seen it yet?
Yeah.
This is Sister Monica Parker. She's out of Santa Cruz, California. She has a song called Tears. Sister Monica Parker on Music Business Radio Demo Derby.
My pillow, I can't stop crying. Tears on my pillow. I can't deny it. Smiling when I go to bed. And I wake up crying. Every single day I wonder what went wrong, how everything has changed. Now I'm singing another sad song. Tears on my pillow. I can't deny it.
Sister Monica Parker on Music Business Radio. SisterMonica.com is her website. The song Tears out of Santa Cruz, California. How about it, Craig?
Oh, yeah. Well, Timeless Blues never gets old. She's got a photo on here in the back with her with B.B. King. It's clear where her heart is. Strong singer. She wrote that song, as she did most every song on this. And, yeah, that's with the blues happening on the West Coast. That sounds good to me.
A tight band, too. I imagine they're probably playing out live.
Yeah, they have that look. They look like you could go and hire them and have a big party.
Well, that's how you get good, man. You don't just show up at the studio and expect it to happen. You got to play it together, and they definitely sounded that. SisterMonica.com is the website if you like that. Next up, Arthur Allagood out of White House, Tennessee. The song Keep Your Head Up on Music Business Radio. Arthur Allagood from White House, Tennessee on Music Business Radio Demo Derby. That song is called Keep Your Head Up. Craig Havighurst, how about it?
Well, I've heard of this guy. I think his name is familiar. He's clearly working around, and that was a very professional-sounding record, very listenable and great mix, melodically strong. That was a strong pop record. I think that felt nice. Not quite sure what to say about it, but it was like his vocal quality, texture.
I got one more question for you, Craig. Not really a Demo Derby question, although it could apply because we just played some music. How do bands get your attention as a journalist or as a producer from Music City Roots?
You go through your days and you are just like any other music consumer or fan, flipping through the sites that you respect. And I still get a lot of stuff sent by publicists in the roots music field, so I'm hearing the stuff that's coming out on the larger folk and bluegrass labels. And I'm actually pretty slow on the uptake. I mean, I've never held myself out as the first guy to know about something hip. I just kind of feel like when you've heard people talk about something 3 or 4 times, sometimes you have to go, geez, I better go track this down. And sometimes I wish I was more gifted at being that discovery. But I don't listen as much as I know some of my music writing colleagues listen to. I just do not physically get up and start spinning records while I'm shaving and having them just piling on. I don't work very well with vocal music playing. So I have to kind of carve out time to go, well, what's on the coffee table? Let's just see. And I tend to zoom in on stuff that I know has got some heritage with the world of bluegrass, acoustic, and roots music and progressive bluegrass music. That's kind of where I start and then venture out from there.
Craig Havighurst, he's the author of the book Air Castle of the South, WSM and the Making of Music City. If you're interested in that, it's available wherever books are sold. Senior producer and show journalist for Music City Roots, live from the Loveless Cafe. It's a syndicated weekly Americana radio show and webcast. Check your local listings or musiccityroots.com. Anything else to add about that?
Well, David, yeah, your remarks about it being a community and invitation to think about it was the word that's driven us from the beginning, that a show like this won't be sustainable over the long haul unless there is a sort of circles of family around it who continue to support it. And we're going to start looking in the next few months at rolling out more of a membership model and looking for sort of direct patronage and doing our own sort of, well, I won't call it a Kickstarter, but I mean, any show from the Schermerhorn Symphony Center and the National Symphony to jazz performance spaces, they derive their support from a wide variety of places. But if the community that believes in them and listens isn't there for them at the end of the day, then it can't survive and succeed. But we feel like we've built a lot of goodwill. We've made a lot of friends. And we really want to continue to serve the artists and let the artists have a really clear, independent, and untrammeled voice. And if we do that, I think we'll succeed.
So check it out online at musiccityroots.com. Craig, thanks for being here. Thank you for listening. Thanks to everybody who sent in demos for the Demo Derby. Check us out online at musicbusinessradio.com. And I'll see you next week when I'll interview another industry guest.
Thanks for listening to Music Business Radio, a production of Tuned In Broadcasting Incorporated, Nashville, Tennessee. Recorded in the WRLT Lightning 100 studios. Music Business Radio is produced by Gary Crane, David Hooper, and Dan Buckley. Special technical assistance by Tom Hansen. With Pro Tools post-production by Justin Hamill and Dan Buckley. And Lester said, the train leaves in 5 minutes. For information on syndication, guest booking, Demo Derby music, or downloading previous episodes, visit musicbusinessradio.com.
Music